If you are young enough to have not seen Nebraska in the 1990s, then you probably want me to stop talking right now before I explain to you just what you missed by being too young to have seen Nebraska in the 1990s. Now, I think I can speak for a lot of young people in that way because when I first moved to Nebraska, I was 22 years old. And Nebraska had not gone through the glory days of the 90s yet. It was back in 1990, so we hadn't seen the 92 to 97 run. In fact, it was just getting started. And I'll tell you, when I first moved to Nebraska, I got so sick and tired of hearing about the glory days of the prior decade of Nebraska before I moved to Omaha. It was, I just got sick of it, to be honest with you. It was just Nebraska this, and they used to be this and used to be that, and they were, dominant and beat Oklahoma 7,000-0 every year. If only I'd have been there. If only I'd been young enough or lived in Omaha or whatever. It took me a while to warm up to the team. But it wasn't because of the stories from old folks who had been there and done that before me. It was because I got to watch the renaissance of Nebraska in the mid to late 90s. Well, it's been a long drought since then. And if you're young, like I said, you're probably tired of hearing about it. Well, I've got some good news for you. First of all, before we talk about the good news, I need to share some what is relatively unpleasant news. I put together a formula where I said, let's look at Nebraska over the last 32 years, all the way back to 1990 when I moved to Omaha. And let's look at the offense and the defense every year. And for every 100 yards of offense that Nebraska ran or threw for, I'd give them a touchdown. And for every 100 yards the defense allowed, I'd take a touchdown away. And for every actual touchdown, they got another touchdown. And I add all that stuff up together, and I came up with a number that was the difference between the number of touchdowns and yardage touchdowns Nebraska was either scoring or allowing in the 90s until now. Kind of a fantasy football deal. And I want you to look at the screen. Check this chart out. Back in the 1990s, in the period from 1992 to 1997, Nebraska was rolling up on teams at nearly a 6 touchdown difference in terms of the yardage and the actual touchdowns scored. In other words, it wasn't just they were winning. The way those teams in the 90s were winning were literally like a steamroller. It was incredible. And of course, the last 5 years, Nebraska is barely at .2 touchdown difference in terms of yards and actual touchdowns. It is a cliff dive, and if you didn't see the team in the 90s, then yes, in reality, you missed an amazing run. John Johnson over at Corn Nation wrote an article back about 7 months ago at his website entitled, "Do Nebraska Football Fans Need Another Look Back at the 1990s?" I want to play you a clip, a little video from the video that accompanies that article.
I mean, there's a whole probably generation of people who have no idea what that era of Nebraska football was about. I'm sure that people talk to them enough about it that they're maybe sick of it. But I think one of the keys is to remember that that's who we are. And we don't have to stop being that just because we suck lately.
And now I want to read you a comment that someone left on his article that sort of encapsulates how lots of Husker fans who are old enough to remember feel. This person says, "In fact, 1970 all the way through 1997 were pretty fun for those of us who lived during it. The last replica of those continuous winning olden days were during the 2008 to 2014 stretch. So now, on to this fall," meaning this was, by the way, 2022 fall, "and hoping that Tom's last quarterback, that's Tom Osborne and Scott Frost as the coach, can finally figure it out. Wouldn't it be fun to see your kids and grandkids go on the same ride we did?" Now, I've got good news for you if you're a young Husker fan. You've had to listen to old folks like me and John Johnson and others talk about what happened in the 1990s. In the same way I had to listen to folks talk about Nebraska pre-1990 when I moved here. Now, the difference is I got to see Nebraska just kind of pick up where it left off about, a year before and then go on a run that is, well, it's legendary now. But if you're too young to remember that, then all you've seen is a slide into what we saw at the end of 2022, which just cosmically ended up with Mickey Joseph being arrested. It's just crazy how bad things got up until the last moment of 2022. But here's the good news for you. For the rest of your life, you're going to be thankful and grateful for every win that Nebraska has in ways that people like me and the old folks who saw the glory days can never appreciate. You are in a position now to watch Nebraska come back from the abyss. You'll be able to tell people not about the good old days, but when your kids can't remember a time when Nebraska was terrible, you'll be able to explain to them that you were there. Now, in the same way that many of you young fans, you may feel like you missed out, or you feel jealous of old guys like me who got to see the glory days in action in the 1990s. I would love to be young and love to live through what you're about to go through as a fan for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. For the fans who are young now and stick with the team, you're at the start of something really good. And somewhere down the road, some of you will be watching a Nebraska game, and you'll have your kids with you, your grandkids, and y'all be watching, and you'll shed a tear or two as Nebraska finally wins another national championship. Because you won't be able to remember the glory days of Nebraska's past, but you'll know what it feels like to live in the glory days of Nebraska's future.